Hey! Today I'd like to do a few things. The first thing that I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Mixswitch, which is the DSP module that I used for the demo video I made on the CV-controlled switch, or mute. Then I would like to talk about sequential switches. As sort of a preview of the sequential switch discussion, I guess one of my original plans was to actually build a sequential switch in code, with these only being used to enable physical switch control, but even though I discovered a lot of really interesting stuff, I have not been able to do it yet. While it has been a bit disappointing, this actually presents a really good opportunity to begin talking about bees, and show how it can be used to greatly enhance the functionality of even a crummy module like Mixswitch. Finally, I'd like to do a short demo of the sequential switch-like tool that I set up for Aleph using Mixswitch and bees. Also, before I go any farther, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that subscribed to this channel. It really means a lot. First, let's investigate Mixswitch. Since I covered the process of how to add and set up variables in the previous videos, ring mod and crossfader, and since it is also contained in the official documentation, I won't cover every step of the process in this video. I am thinking that covering the whole process each time might result in some really long videos. So, I have params.c open already. We talked about making bool types for switches using eparam type bool in the ring mod video. And basically, since it worked so well for mixring, I thought that it would also work really well to create mutes for Mixswitch. This time, I created 4 eparam type bool switches, one for each aleph channel. And I just set them up using the same procedure that I demonstrated in the ring mod video. Before moving on, I'd kind of like to talk about the inspiration for why I decided to do this. Even though I don't have one of these, I've really always liked the idea of the Joranalogue switch 4. Since Aleph has all the functionality required to make something similar, I wanted to give it a try. I guess one important thing to point out is that I'm only talking really about the bottom half with the switches. And I also realize the module involves manual switch control, which is really cool, and I really like those switches. They look really sturdy. But I wanted to add ability to control the switches with CV. I guess the other thing to point out is that my inputs are not normalized. I've kept each input and output separate. Okay, let's bring up Mixswitch.c. Just like all of the other videos and demonstrations so far, I just used the basic Mix C template again. In this case, I added Chan switches 0 through 3. And I set up default values. In terms of logic, I just have some really basic, sort of crummy if conditionals here for each channel. When condition is 1 or true, there will be output, and when condition is 0 or false, output will be zeroed out. This gave me the effect I was looking for, and I added some CV routing and control with bees prior to making the demo video for the simple switches, or mutes. Since the CV op in bees has a trigger input option, I just set it to enable change on transition, and, according to the documentation, the threshold is around 2.5 volts. So I ended up with a CV-controlled and simplified version of what I imagined the switch 4 to be, and I had a lot of fun with it. I really like switch modules. But like I said at the beginning, I actually wanted to try creating a sequential switch for my own kind of knowledge and coding skill building. I wanted to evolve Mixswitch into Mixswitch, which would essentially be the Mixswitch mutes enhanced with sequential switch stepping type functionality. I guess the next thing I'd like to do, because we're talking about sequential switches, is sort of look at what a sequential switch is. Like the other video topics, I know this might be very obvious. I guess it just helps me, when trying to create the code, but also when making these videos, to have or maintain a less tangled path towards the goal I am trying to achieve or explain. I found this really great site, which I will also try to remember to link. Basically, it says, in the most common form, a few different inputs are routed to one output, and, this was the really important part for me, a pulse or gate input then steps through the inputs one at a time, switching which one is routed to the output. Also, the two examples of sequential switches in Eurorack format that I usually think of are the switch from 2HP and RYO Paths. I really like both of these. I guess it might not be fair to just call Paths a sequential switch, because it seems like there is a lot of other functionality too. For my Seek switch, kind of taking inspiration from part of Paths, I wanted separate outputs, one for each channel. Part of this is because I like to have the option to do different routing for each output. But it also made things easier from a coding standpoint. I had a lot of difficulty trying to get my code working for Mixswitch Switch, and I just wanted to work with Mixswitch as it was to get the basic sequential switch type functionality working before adding more variables to make troubleshooting easier. Since we still have outbus available, I'm sure that it would be possible to route everything to a main out if you wanted to. I just didn't do it this time. Also, in my case, I'm planning on doing some other modules where separate outputs are going to work better, so I will probably leave it like this. Getting back to the main problem this time, because I was not able to successfully code the sequential switch functionality into the DSP module, I had to give more thought to how the same goal could be achieved using bees ops, and this presented a great opportunity to begin branching out into investigating bees. The first thing that I needed to do was actually look at the bees op guide. The guide is available in the aleph docs on the monome site, but it's also available in the project repository, and I think that the project repository version might be slightly more complete. The first thing I did, since I already had an idea of how to enable the stepping, was to look through the guide and find the ops I needed. I will talk more about the ops I used in a second, but in terms of a general strategy, I guess it helped me to think about the bees ops as C programming language functions. Since they are C-based, they actually are functions, or collections of functions, but that is what helped me to begin to understand how I could use them, and how they could work together. So, essentially, using bees is almost like building a C program where the bees ops are pre-built functions that you can plug in where certain functionality is desired. I am sure this is probably really obvious for people with tech backgrounds, but it took a little while for me to come to this realization. Thinking about it that way really helped me to begin to figure out how these things work, but I'm still trying to get a better handle on all of this. Since we've already talked about Mixswitch, which is the module component of the sequential switch, I would like to talk about the bees settings that I made. I've been kind of trying to figure out a good way of documenting bees settings. And I guess the best way that I could come up with for now was to create a separate page for the GitHub wiki. The preset system on Aleph works for local saves, but for documentation purposes and making videos, I needed something else. There is only one entry in here right now, and it's for the sequential switch like bees patch or preset I will be demonstrating at the end of this video. I guess the first thing to talk about is flow. Because bees is so awesome. It actually gives you several different ways to accomplish the same task or functionality, and in many cases, all of these ways can actually be used together. The triggering method that I used for the demo was the Metro bees op, but I also set up one of the CVNs and one of the switches to trigger, so either one of those methods could also be used to trigger, even with Metro going. The next op I used was tog, which sends a 1 value each time it's toggled, which then feeds into accumulate or accum. Accum starts at 1 and counts to 4, then wraps back to 1, and starts counting up again. This is what enables the stepping and wrapping functionality that was included in the sequential switch definition or overview from earlier. Next, I used a splitter to split accum into 4 outs, sort of like a Eurorack multiple module. And each out from the splitter goes into a separate logical is. I set each logical is to fire on a different value. The first fires when a 1 value is received, the second fires on 2, the third fires on 3, the fourth fires on 4. Each logical is triggers one of the 4 EPROM type bool switches in Mixswitch, and that's essentially how it works. So the DSP module that I'm using is Mixswitch, which we've already talked about, so let's talk about operators, outputs, and inputs. All of these are based on the corresponding pages in the Aleph menus. What I've tried to do is note the changes from the default set and/or settings. For operators, I needed to add several of the operators in order to get the functionality because they weren't there by default, and a list of the ones that I added, in the order I added them, is contained in the operators section. The inputs and outputs sections are set up the same way. I don't think covering settings individually would be a good idea, because I think it could get very convoluted very quickly. I guess the only general thing that I really want to say is that, even though they have numbers, like 010 or 012, those just indicate order. Depending on the order that bees ops are added in, the numbers might be different, but that's not really important. The important part for the effect is having the settings set up the way they are here. Okay. At this point, I would like to move into the demo, which I think gives a basic idea of how my sequential switch-like patch works. I like using switches and things to get clangorous randomness, and I usually use random clocks and stuff with them. Since I just used the default Metro setting and didn't change it, this patch is not so random. I did find a way to get a little going towards the end though. Anyway, thank you.